Here we are in lesson 4, cells, worksheets and workbooks. We're going to deal with the glaringly obvious parts of Excel and discuss what they are. The first thing that strikes everyone is the rectangles. Unlike any other document, we're greeted with a white page with rectangles all over it, and that's the first thing that people find daunting. These rectangles aren't called rectangles, they're called cells. One cell has a green box around it. That box is telling us that this is the active cell. That means that if I type anything on my keyboard, it's going to appear in that cell. And that's the thing about every single cell. Every cell can hold one thing, and one thing only. I can click anywhere and change the active cell. There's no problem with that at all. The cells I can see are not the limitation of the system. You can see that there are numbers running down the side here. Those numbers are called the row references. So the active cell I've got here is in row 16. And if I click here, I'm now on row 26. Notice it goes to 38. But if I start scrolling, I can go further and further. Now I'm not going to scroll all the way to the bottom because there are over 1 million cells downwards. Now I haven't counted each one, but I have had to travel all the way to the bottom. It takes a long time. The other part of this is along the top. These are not numbers, these are letters. And the letters are the column references. Now I emphasize the letters because if we go to the end, we've got Z, and you might think, well, we'd end at 26, but it doesn't. As soon as you get to Z, it goes AA, AB, AC, all the way to AZ, and then becomes BA, BB, BC, and so on. How far does that go? Well, that goes to ZFD. That's 2.5 million cells towards the right. So there are plenty of cells for you to be working with, and you are unlikely to run out of them. Not impossible, just unlikely. So we've got the cell. That every single rectangle you see on here is called a cell. We've got the active cell. We've got the row reference, and we've got the column reference along the top. This cell has a specific reference, and we always describe it by the column reference followed by the row reference. So this cell has the reference F12. If we move to here, this cell has H14. So every cell has a unique reference, and that's really useful to know. If we look up here, this box is actually telling us that this is H14. It tells us H14, and anywhere I click, that cell reference is K4. This box is known as the naming box, and we can use that really effectively, and we will look at that shortly when we come to look at selecting cells. So what have I got? I've got cells, and I've got the active cell. The collection of cells all together on this entire page is called a worksheet, and you can see this one is called sheet 1. You can see a plus here. This is for adding a new sheet. Now I've got another sheet, again 2.5 million cells left to right, and just over 1 million cells top to bottom. So now I've got two sheets, sheet 1 and sheet 2. Cell references are the same. So just like this one, I'm on H4. If I go to sheet 2, I can go to H4. But these are not the same H4. Despite it saying there it is, they are not the same H4. And we can work between sheets. So an Excel document can have one or more sheets. So what do we call it as a collection of sheets? Well, when we come to save Excel, and if we have a look up here, we can see this is Excel. I haven't saved it yet. I'll mention this in a moment, but I haven't saved it yet, and this is called book 1. So when I come to save this, it will want to save this as book 1. What I'm going to do now is we're going to save this. File. Because I haven't saved this before, save and save as will take me to the same menu. Once I've saved it once, they will take me to different places. But let's prove that. Let's go to the save as first of all. That's what the save as looks like. So let me come back off of this. So back to file, down to save. You'll notice it's jumped to save as, and now I've got my save as area. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a folder which I've got here called Excel Lessons, but let's help you create that folder. Let's go to Browse. I'm in my documents here. I've got my Excel Lessons there, and all I've got to do is go into that folder. How did I create it? I simply clicked on New Folder. A new folder appeared and I called it Excel Lessons. Let's go into the Excel Lessons folder, and there's nothing in there. It wants to call it Book 1. That's because a collection of worksheets is called a workbook, and you can see that Excel Workbook. So I don't want to call it Book 1. You need to call these something that describes what you're working on, and calling it Book 1 doesn't help because the next one will be called Book 2, and it won't take you very long to have Book 1 to Book 100, and someone will say to you, where's that spreadsheet? And you will go, I don't know, it's one of these 100. So let's call this Lessons. I'm going to use this Excel spreadsheet simply to explore some of the ideas in future lessons. So I'm going to call it Lessons. I've put it in my Excel Lessons folder, and I'm just going to click Save. Now remember, I said once I've saved it, I then have a different save and save as. Now because I'm using the internet to save my files, Excel has switched on auto save. That means that everything I do on here is automatically saved to this file, and this file is saved on the cloud. If I don't want that, if I want to just save it myself, I can switch off autosave. Now when I go to this file, I've got the save and save as again. If I click on save, it just saves it. If I go to save as, it then offers me the same option, and I can rename the file. The thing is, I've got this running on the web, and I'm quite happy to have autosave on. But every time we close this down, you're going to be prompted, if you haven't got autosave on, it would ask you to save it every time. So that I can show you how that works, I'm going to switch autosave off at the moment and leave it as that. So what have we got? We've got cells, the active cell. Cells are referenced by their column reference and their row reference. We have worksheets. We can have one or more. Every workbook must have at least one worksheet, but we can have hundreds of worksheets. We have worksheets that hold the cells that we're interested in, and it offers us even more cells. A collection of worksheets are saved as a workbook, and that's cells, worksheets, and workbooks. In the next lesson, we're going to have a brief look at the Ribbon Toolbar. That's this up here. Until then, see you in lesson 5. Hi and welcome to lesson 5. In the last lesson you learnt about cells. You learnt about the active cell, you learnt about worksheets, you learnt about workbooks, and you discovered how to save and save as workbooks, and equally the naming convention, so giving it a name that makes sense and one that's going to help remind you of what you were looking at. The other part of Excel is the menu ribbon bar. That's this along here. This is the Ribbon Toolbar, and everything you're likely to need is going to be along here somewhere. Each of the options gives you a range of tools usually associated with the word at the top. Home is a general collection. It holds most things that the others don't hold. It also uses the most frequent tools, so the ability to change the way the font looks in each cell or in one cell. The copy-paste tools, the undo and redo buttons, the ability to center or align your text within or wrap text within a cell. That might not make any sense, but it will do later. Merge and center again won't make any sense at the moment, but when we come to combine one or more cells, this tool becomes useful. This is the format of each cell. Again, you don't need to understand it at the moment, but the options there and the ability to control the way cells look. We have some controls for that here, but these are what we call semi-permanent. They will remain the same no matter what data you put into them. These are conditional. We can also insert, delete or format cells, rows or columns. And then we've got editing tools over here, which we will look at later on, but that's mainly the home area. Insert is obviously for putting things into the worksheet. Tables? Well, Excel seems to be a table of tables, but these tables here are pivot tables and that type, and they're very, very useful. You'll learn about those later on. Pictures, if you want to insert smart art or shapes, 3D models onto here, you do that through here. There are other programs that you could add in and include into the system, or charts, which we'll be looking at later on. You've got 3D mapping, altering the way charts look, introducing new flash charts, and so on and so forth. But this is about inserting objects into your spreadsheet. How the spreadsheet looks, how you want to orientate the way everything is, either when you come to print it or how it looks generally for you. You can bring things forward and backwards, but that's called layering, and that's for later on. The main thing you'll use within this area is looking here for things like what can I view. So grid lines, these are these light grey lines that you can see that define each cell. You may want to not view them or view them. You've got headings. Those are the cell references, top and bottom. You might want to switch them off or switch them on again. You might want to have them visible when you come to print the document. Same thing with the headings. Usually when you print, you don't want to see these cell column references or row references, and you don't want to see the grid lines, but sometimes you do. Formulas. This is the backbone of Excel. This is the heart of the power behind it, and it looks really confusing. So we're not going to spend very long looking here because we're not dealing with these at the moment, but when you come to look at formulas later on, this becomes really, really useful. If you remember, in the very first video I showed you a spreadsheet that took data from the FTSE 100, and I used this tool, the data tool, to do so. I used the from web option, but there are other ones that you can do, and you can alter the way that the data is displayed. Data is simply what is contained in a cell or multiple cells, and that can be a column of data, a row of data, a sheet of data, a selection of data, or just one cell. Again, don't worry about the terminology there. We will go over all and each term as we come across it in the later lessons. Review. This option allows us to do a few things to control the way that our sheet appears, or to give ourselves help. So it will help us control the spelling or look up keywords. It will also allow us to add comments. So sometimes you might want to put some data into a cell and then add a comment that tells someone about the data in that cell. You can protect a sheet to stop someone from altering the data on that sheet. Or you can protect the workbook, which allows no one to change anything in the workbook unless they remove the protection. And you can password protect these. and you can equally allow someone only partial access to some of the cells. So they might be able to edit this cell, but they can't edit that cell. There are some good reasons for that, and we'll look at those later on. View is how you're going to see the spreadsheets. So at the moment we're in normal, and this is the most common view. You have page break view. That allows you to see it with lines that show you how it would be divided up if you came to print it on the printer, usually for a piece of paper that's A4 size. Page layout allows you again to see how it would look, each cell within an A4 page. These lines have only appeared now because I've just chosen that option. I can choose a custom view if I want. I also have again the ability to turn off the grid lines, the headings, and this option here called the formula bar, which we haven't looked at yet, but we will do later on. I can zoom into the sheet, and I can zoom back to normal, and I can even zoom to a selection, and I have many other functions. The freeze panes become useful later on. So I have many options available to me, and we can explore those later on. This line, by the way, will appear if you've selected page layout or page break preview. Now, assuming you're following along with me, this will appear. We need to get rid of it because it's just rather annoying, and you'll notice that it appears all the way down. So rather than that confuse us, we're going to have to just do a couple of steps, and if you followed me, let's help you get rid of them. But the steps I'm going to show you are not an essential part of the lesson. I'm not going to test you on what I'm going to show you now. To get rid of them, we simply need to go to File. We need to go down to the bottom and look for the word Options. We click on Options, and this menu will appear. We then need to go to Advanced. Scroll down. In this center part, I'm using the middle mouse button just to scroll down slowly. If I don't want to do that, I can use a scroll bar. This is a scroll bar on this side here that allows me to go up and down. And if I keep scrolling, I'll get to a section that says Display. We're not interested in that one. So if I scroll down a bit further, I've got display options for this workbook. Not interested in that one. I've then got one that says display options for this worksheet, and I've got show page breaks. As soon as I clicked on these, Excel ticked this for me, but Excel hasn't given us a nice option to switch this off as easily as it switched it on. So I'm simply going to click, take that out, click on OK, and as if by magic, those lines have disappeared. You don't have to remember that. That's not part of the lesson here, but just in case you followed me through down that little rabbit hole, we're back to where we should have been. So that's the Ribbon Toolbar. This will become more and more familiar with you as you go through more and more of the lessons. But in the next lesson, we're going to have a look at these cells again, and something I did a few moments ago that probably made you go, what is he doing? Is we're going to be looking at selecting cells and a little bit more about this name box. So, see you in the next lesson. Hi, and welcome to lesson 6. So, do you remember we looked at the spreadsheet initially and we talked about these things called cells, and I talked about the active cell. And then in the last video I started clicking around and seemed to do some really weird things. So let me go through some of these things. I have here, as I say, the cells, and I have the active cell. But I can, simply by clicking, holding the mouse button down and dragging the mouse down, I have the ability to select more than one cell. Now you'll notice that they are greyed out, that these are selected, and you can tell that because of the green box. So are these now all active cells? Well, no. The active cell is the one at the top, and we can see that by the F5 up here. That's the active cell, but I have selected these cells, and that allows me to do a few things with these. I can change the way they look, which is what we're going to be looking in the next video. So selecting cells can be really useful. I can select cells, and then what I can do is I can press the Enter key on my keyboard, and the active cell will change. And if we look in the name box, I can now see that F6 is the active cell, now F7, and so on. And when I get down to the bottom, it goes back to the top. So I can change the active cell, which means that as soon as I'm there, I can actually type and press enter, and the details will appear there. Now don't be tempted to use the arrow keys, because that will deselect the cells you've got. That's alright. I pressed the delete key to get rid of the content. So look for the delete key, which is normally to the right of your enter key, and you just delete the content. So I can select a range of cells. Notice I emphasize the word arrange. That's not me just being weird, that's the term for it. So I've selected a range of cells, so this is called a range. I don't have to just go downwards. Obviously I can go upwards as well, and I can go to the right, or I could go to the left. Equally, I could also go diagonally, and I can go a selection of cells in that sense. So I can select more. Remember, it's click, hold the mouse button down, drag down, and then across, and keep moving the mouse. And until you let go of the mouse, you can choose how wide you want that to be. When I press the enter key, I will go through changing the active cell, but it will only be active within the selected range. Remember, don't use the arrow keys or you'll lose what you've selected. It's not gone, it's just that I've now got to go and reselect them if I want to. What else can I do? Well, I can also select by column by simply clicking on the column's cell reference. If I click there, I've now selected everything in column G, and I mean everything. I told you originally there are 1 million, over 1 million cells going down. I have now selected all 1 million plus cells, and if I wanted to do the I can do so. And if I want to click, hold the mouse button down and drag it across, I can select multiple columns. Obviously I can do the same with the cell references for the rows. Click on them, and I've click on them, and I will select the entire row, everything in that row. That's that 2.5 million cells are now all selected, ready for me to do something with them. Again, I can select a range of rows. Now I could select all rows, but that means going down all the way down by 1 million. That's a bit tiring. To do the other way, I could do it that way, but there's 2.5 million that way, so that's not very good. So what I could do is, instead of clicking on the columns to select the columns or the rows to select the rows, I could also go between them to what doesn't look like it's a button at all, but click on that, and I've now selected the entire sheet, all 2.5 by 1 million of them. That's a huge number of cells. So I've now selected them all. Something worth noting about selection, let's look back at this name box. It keeps telling me what is the active cell, F5, C3, I9. But let's now click, hold the mouse button down and drag down. Can you see as I drag down, I've selected 4 cells, and it's saying 4RX1C. The X is just represents times, the R is row, the C is column. I have 4 rows by 1 column selected, and if I keep moving that, I can see now I've got 6 rows and 4 columns. Remember, I haven't let go of the mouse button, so that's perfectly fine. As long as I keep doing that, I can keep moving that and those numbers will change. It's not until I've stopped 8 rows by 5 columns and let go of the mouse will it return to telling me which one's the active cell. So that's really useful. I now know how many cells I've selected. Why is that useful? Well, when we come to the revision lesson, we'll see how that becomes useful to us. So I can select a range of cells. Another way of doing quick cells is to click on the cell, and then rather than hold the mouse button down and run it across, is to click on the column, hold down the shift button. Now that's usually above the what's called control button, the CTRL. It's got an empty arrow pointing upwards and usually has the word shift. You've actually got two of them, one on the left hand side of your keyboard and one on the right hand side. The right hand side one being just below the enter key. But if I hold down the shift key, I then can move my mouse all the way over to, let's say, the R, click, and it will select all that range just in a simple click. B, shift, R, selected. 2, shift, 29, selected. And then we've got that weird one. Well, do you remember I said that the shift key is just above the control key, the CTRL key? Well, let's hold down the CTRL key. If I hold that one down, if I click on B first, then hold down the CTRL key and then click on D, I've selected columns B and D but not C. This differs from the shift because shift will select everything from B to D. This will only select the columns I'm clicking on. Not only that, but I can click on rows as well. At the very least, this lets me build a very pretty pattern out of the crossovers all the time until I click away. So the shift key will allow me to select multiple cells from B to, let's say, Z. If I've chosen an active cell and then hold down shift and click on B, it will select everything across there. I can hold shift and do entire rows, or I can hold down the CTRL key and select just the cells I'm interested in. And obviously if I click on the cell, hold down shift and then click down here, it will do the same thing then. So holding down shift, click first of all on the cell you want, hold down the shift key, click somewhere else, and now I've got my selection. 17R, 17 rows by 9 columns is this selection. I'm still holding the shift key down. As soon as I let go of it, it tells me the active cell is E5. Similarly, I could click there. I've clicked on D5. I'm now going to hold down the control key and I'm going to click on G9, and you can see that I can select just the cells I'm clicking on, and it's just very pretty. That does become useful. So knowing what the shift key does and what the control key does is really useful. Do notice, by the way, when I'm doing the control key one, the active cell is the last one I clicked on. So the active cell changes with that option. What happens when I press enter? It jumps in order between the selection. Hopefully you remembered the order. So in this video we've learned how to select cells just by clicking, just by dragging to the side, just by dragging downwards, clicking on the columns, clicking on the rows, clicking on the columns and dragging, clicking on the rows and dragging. Remember, when I say dragging, I mean hold down the mouse, the left hand mouse button, and drag downwards. Using the shift key to do a range of cells between the 2 points clicked. Can be that column, row, or just a selection of cells. Or hold down the control key and simply select only the rows and columns you choose, or just the cells you choose. That's selection. In the next one we're going to be looking at altering the columns and rows. That might sound a little bit mysterious. It will make complete sense at the end of the next video. So see you there. Hi and welcome to lesson 7, altering rows and columns. So What do I mean by altering rows and columns? Well, let's have a look at the situation. I've selected cell D10 and I'm just going to press a few keys on my keyboard. Notice that the cell contents can go beyond the cell. So when I press enter, the contents of cell D10 now extend into E10. And if I then put some data into cell E10, it cuts short or concatenates cell D. It trims it off. The data's still there. Here's the formula bar, by the way. The formula bar is showing us what data is in that cell. So I can see, if I look at the cell here, I can see it's got FFFG at the end. But if I actually click on the cell, I can see that it's FFFG, FHG, and so on. So there's a lot more I can see there. So if I click on an active, if I make a cell active, then I can see the contents of that within the formula bar, which you might say to yourself, well, okay, that's quite useful if it extends too far, but I can see the contents. That becomes much more clear later on. So we're looking here, we've got the contents there and they overlap. So what could I do about that? Well, I could click on there, as we learnt in the last lesson, to make that the active column. I don't actually have to do that, but it marks out what I'm trying to do. And then between the cell column D and column E, there is a line. And if I move my mouse just over top of it, I can see that the arrow that's pointing downwards, which says select column E or select column D, I can move it between and it suddenly changes to an arrow pointing both directions. Click, hold the mouse button down, drag towards the side, and you'll notice there's a new box appeared, width 11.43 and in brackets 85 pixels, and simply keep extending it, let go, and you can start to see more and more of the contents. Take a little bit further and I can see the whole of the contents. Now I'm going to take that back. So I'm roughly where I was before. I don't have to have selected that column to do so. I can do that anyway. So it doesn't have to be the active column that is selected. I can alter the column even if it's not the active one. Trying to judge roughly where it is can be a bit annoying. Let's take that back again. There's another trick. This time, go between the two cells again, exactly as we've been doing. Just go between them and then double click. That means click with the left hand mouse button rapidly twice. 1, 2. And it's auto fitted the column to the data. If I do it to E, go between them and double click, it's moved marginally. If I put the word cat, I held down the caps lock by accident there, but that's all right. We can work with that. And if I now go before F, it will reduce the size of it. Notice, by the way, that if I want to make this cell wider, if I want to make column D wider because the contents are tight there, I have to go to the line after it. Going before makes no sense. Going after makes it wider to it. So I can alter the columns either by selecting the boundary and widening, or by double clicking to fit the data. What if I selected a selection? What if I now altered a selection of columns? What if I decided to alter just column H while I've got D to J selected? Let's just see. I'm going to move that. Now I'm going to be looking at that box that's appeared. I'm holding the left hand mouse button down and I'm looking at that box, and notice I've got two numbers at the moment, 9.86 and then 74 pixels. Pixels are the smallest definable point on the screen. It's a dot. Now what a dot is, it's the smallest dot your screen can talk to. It's the smallest dot your computer can alter in any way, shape or form. Your screen is defined by pixels. How many pixels along by how many down. The other number is how many characters can fit in. If you remember with the D1, it cut it off slightly. So 9.86 is wide enough to have almost 10 characters appear. That 9.86 is pretty useless at most times, but pixels is really useful. So let's focus on that. Let's take this to 100 pixels. There it is. Now I'm going to let go. It's not just altered the H column to 100 pixels, it's altered the selection to 100 pixels. So if I choose a selection and I alter the width, then yes, I do have to make sure it's one of the ones that is selected, doesn't matter which one. It will apply whatever I do. Let's make them smaller, let's take it down to 50. And it's altered them all to 50. So I can alter a selection of columns. And obviously if I can do that to columns, I must be able to do that to rows. Again, this time it's the midpoint between two rows, and if I've done a selection, I need to make sure it's within that selection, but let's take that to 48 and let go, and there it is. If I want to double click, by the way, it will pull them back to auto fit the cells to fit the data that's in there, and since I've only got this data, it auto fits the default size. I don't have to select, and I can choose any any row, and I can alter it as I want and double click. So I can do that. So selecting a column will allow me to alter its width. I can alter the width without selecting, but if I select a range, it allows me to alter that range to the same width, keeping them uniform. And the same is true for rows. And again, it doesn't matter as long as it's selected range, as long as I go between two of the selected rows, or even at the end, it's perfectly happy. No point in going before. That doesn't tell Excel anything. If I do that, it will alter row 1. So, what about altering the entire sheet? Well, again, when we talked about selecting the cells, we know we could click on a hold down shift and then go all the way to ZFD or whatever it is, but that's a long way away. That's 2.5 million cells away. So what we're going to do instead is, instead of doing that, do you remember the button there? If I click on the button there, I now have selected the entire sheet. Now I can select the column width. Let's put this to 80. And the entire sheet has a column width of 80. Every single column in this entire sheet is now set to 80 pixels wide. And if I alter the rows, and let's move this to 40, every single row on this sheet is now set to 40 pixels. So I can control the entire sheet by using this button that doesn't look like a button. Have I altered the other sheet? No. All I'm altering is this one sheet. So I can alter this quite happily simply by clicking there and altering this. Let's now take that to 60. Or doing the same there. I can not click anywhere and just alter a single column or a single row or a selection of columns and a selection of rows. If I double click, then it auto fits to the data, and if I take there and double click, it will auto fit to the data in each column. Hopefully that's been useful. Hopefully that makes sense, and you can see now that it's quite nice when you've got a lot of different data of differing widths. Simply selecting the columns of interest and double clicking will make the data fit to suit the data that's contained in the cells. Okay, so in the next lesson we're going to be looking at borders. Again, that might not make any sense at the moment, but in the next video it will make complete sense. See you there. And here we are at lesson 8, borders. And this is where we left lesson 7. I'm going to get rid of the data here by simply selecting the 3 cells of data and pressing the delete key. That's got rid of all the data. Now, we have already learnt about these grid lines, and we understand that if we go to view, we can switch the grid lines off or back on again. We do understand that when we print, the grid lines won't appear. We know that because under page layout we understood the grid lines don't have a tick under print, so when we come to print this, the grid lines aren't there. But when we view the spreadsheet, they do appear, and again we could switch that off if we wanted to. It's the same button. So what if I did want the grid lines to appear? Well, I could do the print, but that's then going to do it across every single cell. Maybe I only want certain cells to appear with a grid line. Well, we don't call it a grid line, we call it a border. So let's just go to cell D3 and let's go to the home option. As I go through, I've got the undo, the clipboard and the font. Now it's quite unusual, but under the font option in the middle is this icon here, and you can see that when I move my mouse over top, then the little help box appears and it offers me bottom border, and if I click on that and move the active cell away, I've got a bottom border there. If I now go to page layout and turn the grid lines off, that remains. Doesn't appear anywhere else, just there. I'm going to put the grid lines back, go back to home. What other options do I have? Well, next to that option is a little drop down menu. So if I click on that, I get another options. I've got bottom, then I've got top. Well, let's click on top. Does that remove the bottom? No. So I can add to the list of items I've got. On the drop down, I've got left and I've got right. So I've got now a box. Now if I want to get rid of that box, I could select no border, and as if by magic it's disappeared. It took me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 clicks to make that box, and then just 1 click to get rid of it. That seems a serious waste of time, and the nice thing is I have the option to just simply say all borders, and that puts a box around it. I also have another option. Let's just get rid of that, no borders. If I click there, I also have one that says outside borders. So how does outside borders differ from all borders? Well, now let's see. Let's just get rid of that one. Now let's choose a selection of cells. Now let's do all borders. And you can see it's now done a border around all the cells I selected. And if I select that range of cells again and then choose no borders, they've all disappeared. If I do that again and I now say outside borders, that's all it's done, giving me the outside. If I tell it to do thick outside borders, then clearly it's done thick outside borders. And I have a number of other options. I could use a double line at the bottom and so on. The thing is that that's really neat, but there are a load and load of options that I might want. I might not want the double border at the bottom, but I might want it on the right or the left or at the top. And I might want it in the middle. And I might want thick outside along the top. I might want a multitude of options, and I've only got a finite number of options here. So what if I wanted to change lots of things? What if I wanted to have more control? Well, if we go all the way to the bottom, we've got one that says more borders. And if I click on more borders, then what I have here, can you see this? This is what I've already got for that selection. I put a double underline, it's showing it to me there. And I can simply click on this image to remove the lines. If you notice, the double line became a solid line. That's because that was the other line that existed. It took me 2 clicks. But what I can do very simply is choose the line and then simply click where I want them to go. That would do the outside border. Now that might seem more of a waste of a click, but actually, what if I click in the middle? Though I only had to click once, it's done all of those vertical lines for me because I told it to do all inside lines. And I can obviously do the same for the rows, so the horizontal lines. And I can change them. I can decide which ones I want by selecting each one. I could take the top line away and tell it to be double, or I could choose that one. And since that's the one selected, wherever I now click, it will change to that double line. But if I didn't want it, I just click again and keep clicking, get rid of it, or change it to what I do want it to be. And if I want that one, all the inside ones, to be a dot dash, I can do that. I can even change the color of the lines. Let's choose a bright red. Now that's a bright red dashed. That's a thick red border. And the more I do that, the more I can alter. I can even change the color and do a diagonal. What use that is, it looks very creative, but that's fine. I've got that. Now I'm going to select all these and I'm going to press the delete key on my keyboard. Oh, nothing's happened. Well, these are borders. This is not data. So Excel's not allowing me to delete it because the delete key deletes data, not borders. And clearly the easiest way of getting rid of the border is to go no borders. And it's gone. And again, there's nothing wrong with selecting the whole sheet and telling it all borders. But why would you do that? Now, in the next video, we're going to be doing a revision exercise. We've learned lots over the last sets of videos. So we want to do a revision exercise where we go over that and practice it. So before we do that anymore, I've got my lessons XLS, and hopefully if you've been stopping the videos and going away, you've got used to saving your work. But you may have kept along or kept it open in the terror that actually you don't know how to save, you can't remember. So that's fine. Remember, you can go to File, and because we've saved this file already, we can go to Save, and that will simply save it. I could click on this disk symbol. That too would save it. The other choice is to click on the X there, and people are always terrified of clicking the X because it's big and it's red and it's saying X, don't do that. And early versions of Windows, that was a very bad way of closing things down. But if I click on this, and because I've made a change to this sheet, if I click on that, it will warn me that I haven't saved it, and it's giving me the option. Do I want to save this worksheet, workbook, or do I want to not save it, or do I want to cancel and just go back, take a breath, recover from the panic, and either click on the disk symbol there to save it, or go to save there, or give it a new name and save it. This is called lessons.xls, and I'm just going to click save. It's told me it's saved. That's fine. It's all ready to be closed. Now I can click on the X, and it now closes Excel as well. All ready for the revision lesson in the next video. See you there. Okay, so we're into lesson number 9, and this is a revision exercise. So this is where you do need to follow alongside, just to practice everything we've been looking at and to understand how to do the tasks we've understood. So let's start off with a really simple one. Let's click on the Start button and find Excel. Start up Excel. We're going to work with a blank workbook, so I'm going to click on blank, and I'm now taken to the blank workbook. And just before we slow down a little bit, I'm going to go to File. Doesn't matter, remember, it doesn't matter if I go to Save or Save As. I'm going to just click on Save. It will take me to Save As, and I'm still in Excel Lessons, so I'm going to click on Excel Lessons, and I'm going to call this one Times Table Square. It doesn't matter if you have capitals or not. It doesn't matter if you spell times table square wrong. It doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter if you put spaces in or don't put spaces in. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you call your worksheet rhinoceros. It just won't make any sense. But calling it times table square, don't panic if you haven't spelt square correctly or anything else. It doesn't matter. Just that the name has some relevance. And I'm going to click on Save. Now remember, my version of Excel is connected to the cloud, to the internet, so my version automatically puts on autosave. And just so that I can make sure that you are able to follow through and that you're not left with a spreadsheet that you can't close because I haven't shown you how to, I'm going to switch off autosave. There it is, times table square, saved. Here we are on this worksheet. Our workbook has one worksheet and the millions of cells. So what we're going to do first is we're going to alter the width of our columns, and I want to do that for the whole sheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to this little square there, remember that one, and I'm going to click with the left mouse button to select the entire sheet. Then what I'm going to do is any of these lines between, it doesn't matter which, but any of them, I'm going to click and I'm going to alter them so that the pixels says 50 pixels, just like that. I don't care about the 6.43, I'm looking at the 50 pixels, and that's fine. I'm going to let go of the left hand mouse button and everything's fine. I'm then going to go down here and I'm going to do the same thing with the rows, but obviously I'm going to alter their height, and I'm going to again take that to 50. So because pixels define the screen size, 50 pixels high by 50 pixels wide, I'm now going to let go of the left hand mouse button. I'm going to end up with squares everywhere. Now that's really neat. That's what I want. Now what I also want to do is I'm going to want a group of cells, 11 cells by 11 cells. So what I'm going to do is click there, and remember I'm going to look at this name box. So click there, hold the mouse button down, drag down and across until that says 11R by 11C, 11 rows by 11 columns, and I'm going to let go. So I've now selected those cells. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the border tool, but I'm not going to click on the border button. I'm going to click on the drop down to its right. Click and the menu drops down. I'm going to go all the way down and I've got more borders. I'm going to click on more borders. I'm going to make sure that the style I've got is this one here, just the thin line, and then all I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it to do the outline, that's all the outside, and the inside. Now obviously I could have just done insert all borders, but I want you to get used to using this tool. Click on OK. I'm now going to click away, and I've got a 11 by 11 grid of squares which have got borders on. And if I now go to page layout and I take the grid lines view out, I can see that that stands out when there's no other grid lines there. So that's everything we looked at so far. We've widened the columns, we've increased the height of the rows, and we've altered the the borders of the cells so that we've got a nice grid there. I've also hidden the grid lines, which I'm going to bring back for the moment because we want to reference those. Now a new trick we haven't done before is down here. This says sheet 1. Not very informative. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on that word sheet 1. Double click, that means click with the left hand mouse button quite rapidly. 1, 2. Notice it's gone grey. Now what a lot of people will do is then press delete or anything else, but because it's all grey, because it's all selected, I just need to start typing. I don't need to press delete or backspace or anything else. All I need to do is times table square. Press enter, and that's now the name of my worksheet. Yes, it's the same name as my workbook, but that's fine. I'm only going to have one sheet on here. So that's a trick we haven't learnt. There's a new one. Name the sheets, which we'll do a lot more of later on. So I've now got a grid 11 by 11, but I don't want this one. So easy enough. Go to home, click on the drop arrow and choose no border. But now I've got a really horrible missing section there, and if I hide the grid view, it just looks odd. So several ways I can solve that. One is to obviously go in there and tell it outside border there, or the other way is to again get used to using the more borders and just tell it I want a border there. And now we've got this nice cutout showing us our grid, and we're going to make much more use of this in the next revision exercise. See, it wasn't that bad. But before we go, we've got one more thing to do. We're going to go File, Save. I'm going to check up here, times table square. You might have seen it flash up with saving, times table square, saved. I can now go to the X, or I could go to close. Close is going to close the spreadsheet, but I might want to click on the X to close Excel. That's it for the revision exercise. In the next one, we're going to start looking at adding data to our spreadsheet. So, see you in the next video.